Welcome to the Organisational Inclusionist. I'm your host, Grace Masuro. In this podcast series, we'll be delving deep into the pressing issues surrounding equality, diversity, and inclusion in both the workplace and the broader world. My goal is to foster understanding, inspire change, and amplify the voices of those advocating for a more inclusive and equitable society. Throughout this series, I'll be engaging in candid discussions with leaders, experts, activists, and changemakers from various fields. We'll explore the challenges, successes, and evolving landscapes of equality, diversity, and inclusion. From dismantling systematic biases to promoting equal opportunities for all, we'll touch on a broad range of topics. But we won't stop at discussing problems. We'll actively seek out solutions and actionable steps to drive positive change. Our aim is to inspire and empower you, our listeners, to take an active role in making the world a better place for everyone. This is the Organisational Inclusionist. Let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Organisational Inclusionist. My name is Grace Masuro and I'm your host, and I'm joined today by Jenny Garrett, who is actually an OBE recipient. She's an award-winning career coach and leadership coach, and she's also the author of Equality versus Equity, which is actually what we're going to be talking about today. Not just the book, but actually the topics. What is equality versus equity, and why do we need more people to get it? Okay. Jenny, thank you so much for joining me today. It means the world to me that I've got you on the podcast and that we're going to have such an impactful conversation, because I do feel like a lot of people still don't understand the difference, and I feel like your knowledge is really going to support that. So thank you for joining.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
My pleasure. So I would love it if you could please give our listeners a bit of an intro into who you are and the work that you do, please.
Okay, it's always interesting where to start when someone's asked you to introduce yourself. I'm going to start right at the beginning with my heritage. So my mum is from St. Lucia and my dad is from Jamaica, but I was born in the UK and have lived here all my life, although I like to go back to those wonderful islands. Started off from humble beginnings in northwest London, and really was always curious and interested in people. Had a variety of roles, and my last role before going into leadership development was as a senior marketer, but it was in a business school. And it was in that business school that I learned about leadership. I learned about coaching. I learned about organizational life and the psychology of it. And that's what's taken me in this direction. So I became a coach. I was freelance as a coach, then studied management learning and leadership, and started to develop my own leadership programs. And that's really led me to where I am today, which is providing leadership programs in organizations, but specifically with an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens. And as you said, I'm an author. I'm an author of 2 books. One that I wrote about 10 years ago, Rocking Your Role, which was a guide to success for female breadwinners. And then my latest book, which is about a year old now, Equality versus Equity, Tackling Issues of Race in the Workplace. So for me, it's all about empowering people, elevating diverse talent, and fostering inclusion.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jenny. So what led you to write the book Equality versus Equity? Where did that come from?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I was speaking at an event for a university, and I started talking about equity, and surprise, surprise, there was a commissioning editor from my publisher, Emerald, there, and she said, "Oh, you're talking about equity. I think this will make an excellent book." At the time, I said, I normally just have a couple of slides on equity. I don't think I've got however many thousands of words to say about it. And she said, well, maybe think about putting a book proposal together. And so I did. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I actually did have a lot to say on the topic. So it wasn't that I had a burning desire to write a book. It wasn't that I had, that I had been thinking I need to speak about this more in the world. It was really someone who saw something I said that could be really valuable to lots of other people. And I think it really helped that I'd written a book before, even though it'd been many years before. So I knew the process and I knew I could do it. So that really helped. And the more I thought about the subject, the more I realize that lots of people aren't talking about it, that it is misunderstood, and that actually it could be really helpful if people can have more of a practical guide, that could
Definitely.
actually give them some tangible steps to move forward.
Absolutely. So who would you say the book is for? You mentioned some tangible guides. Like who
Yeah.
is the audience for this book, and what do they get from it in terms of things that they can take away?
Yeah, I think this book is for anyone who really wants to understand the lived experience of people who from, I like to use the term global majority, who, but that, other people might say people who are ethnically diverse. So, yeah,
Mm,
who really wants to understand the experience of people from the global majority, who wants to help them advance in the workplace and really support them, and really create a world that is fairer than it currently is. I think, particularly if you were a white manager or leader, the book would be absolutely invaluable for you. But I think it's also valuable for anyone. And we know that there is no monolith. And
mm,
the global majority is such a diverse group of people. We can have bias within ourselves, within our groups of Black people, people of South Asian heritage, etc. So,
mm.
I think it's really valuable for anyone who just really wants to understand others' lived experience, who wants to do the work on themselves to be better and a fairer leader and create a better world.
Yeah, amazing. Um, so we see a lot of pushback when we talk about equity and the need to kind of move on from equality now, like even though we
Mm,
still aren't necessarily there with equality, but really getting people to understand that actually we really need them to be driving equity in their spaces as well. I
mm,
actually did a post about it on LinkedIn last year, I think it was.
mm,
And the amount of spikiness that I got from one
mm,
person in particular in my network, who is
mm,
no longer a part of my network, unfortunately,
mm, mm,
was really shocking to me because I definitely got a view that actually if we create equity, then I'm going to lose out. That's the
mm,
impression that I got from kind of his
mm,
response and just how
mm,
angry he was about the term.
mm.
So, but from your perspective, why do you think there is so much pushback to equity?
Oh, it's a really good question. I think we get the whataboutery. So if we're going to think about race and ethnicity, if we're just talking about equity, racial equity, then what about people who have a disability or who are
Mm,
discriminated against because of their sexual orientation? And I think that what I say in the book is it's not an oppression Olympics. We're not in competition here, but we're just talking, sometimes it's good just to talk about race, and sometimes it's great just to talk about
yeah.
disability, whatever it is. So first of
Mm,
all, that understanding that when we talk about racial equity particularly, we're not saying that other inequities are not important, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't give space and focus to this.
yeah.
Ultimately people think they're going to lose, and the thought that for everyone to win, no one has to lose is not something that I think people believe a lot of the time. They think, well, if someone
Mm,
else is going to win, I'm going to miss out. And
yeah.
I definitely have found that the more you help people win, the more you win. It's not like that. The more I help people win, I don't lose, I gain. And we
Definitely.
really need a shift in mindset, because I think there's a scarcity mindset that exists. There's only this much to go around. And if we give more of it to
Yeah.
this group of people, there's not enough for me. I don't think that's true. I think it expands. I think there is more than enough for
Yeah.
everyone. And I think that scarcity mindset really does hold us back, as a
Mm.
society.
Definitely. And I think I get it. When we look back over history, the biggest winners have won by oppressing particular groups. If we look at Hitler, if we look at, slave owners, etc. And I get that that's probably people's point of reference is like, well, actually, they only won because they oppressed that group, or that group had to lose in order for that group to win. Um,
Mhm.
but we don't live in that world anymore. Like,
No.
that isn't how people
Mm,
win, and that isn't
mm,
so I completely agree with you. Like, as a society, we need to get rid of that scarcity mindset. Just this attitude of not sharing. And I was saying in the podcast that I think that with all of the anti-DEI rhetoric, I'm starting to feel and to definitely see that actually that scarcity mindset exists amongst everyone, but just in different ways. And we're definitely seeing that with those that are so against DEI and wokeness. Is they're scared of losing out on this imaginary thing, like someone's going to suddenly come into their house and take all of their belongings because we're trying to create equitable spaces. It's just not realistic, but I'm definitely seeing that. So I completely agree with you there.
Yeah.
How do you feel? Is there any way that we can overcome this scarcity mindset and this fear of losing out?
Yeah, I think we have to step into the unknown. You know, there never has been a time really when we've had equity in society, really. You know, we've been striving for equality and we've realized that hasn't delivered equity. We've never got there.
Yeah.
And because we haven't ever got there, it's not a well-trodden path. It's not somewhere we can say, if I do A, B, and C, I'll get there. And when I get to that destination, it will be amazing. Because we've never done it. And I think that does hold people back because they're not sure what's on the other side. You know, if we get equity, does that suddenly mean then that the people who are in the minority group are now the majority group and now I'm the one who's missing out? There's a fear there. In my book, there's a diagram of this what I call the seesaw power play. So if you think about a seesaw, if there's one person who weighs more than the other, one person, you know, that person has weight, that person has power. If you were little on a seesaw, you got bumped sometimes by the heavier person, didn't you? It was really uncomfortable. I think that's our society. We have that lack of evenness. Some people, just by your accident of birth, you have more power. It's not that you've gone out of your way to get it, it's not that you've done anything. It's just that that's the situation. Whiteness gives you a privilege, you know, and it's important to understand that. And I think the fear is we put equity in place, and equity can look like, you know, giving someone a sponsor in the workplace, making sure we have diverse shortlists, making sure that we, when we're recruiting, we do it in batches so that we notice if there's no diversity when we recruit people. It can look like so many different things. But the fear is you put that to the person who didn't have enough weight as a sandbag on that seesaw and it swings the other way. And that's the big fear. It's going to swing too far the other way. And I'm going to be powerless. I'm going to be the one being bumped on the seesaw. There's a huge fear around that. It's sort of what's going to happen? Will they be kind to me? Will they be generous if it swings the other way? So there's a fear. But I've also got to say, with people who have experienced inequity in society, you know, me, myself being a Black woman, sometimes you're given opportunities, people are giving you those sandbags, and sometimes it's, oh, is this real? You know, can I trust it? You know, or I don't know how to use it. I've never had this place of privilege. How do I make the most of it? I don't know, because I've never had it before. So there's learning on both sides. There's a learning from the people who had the power, who are now worried they might not have it. How do I deal with this? How do I engage when I'm the powerful one? But there's also, for us who've experienced inequity, to say, how do I make the most of this? How do I trust that it's real? How do I leverage it? And how do I engage in a really positive way with others so they know that this is a good thing? And so, yeah, there's a lot of fear on both sides, maybe. And, you know, this sense of how do we trust something that we've never quite experienced? And I think that communication is important. I think humility is really important. And I talk about using your power with humility, knowing you have power and thinking humbly, how can I make a difference in someone's life? These are the things that we need to do. We need to have a different way of being.
Definitely. And I think, you know, that you said a couple of things that really stood out for me. One around, and we talk about this a lot anyway, is that even though we try to educate people about privilege and understanding that, you know, some people have it and some people don't, it's also emphasizing the fact that no one is blaming you
No.
for having privilege. It's
Mm.
not something you came out of the womb asking for. You
Yes.
literally came out with no choice of your own,
Mm.
but you were born with that privilege, and
Yeah.
really appreciating that it's not about blame, it's about appreciating that. I know that, my privilege as a Black woman is that I am less likely to be stopped by the police than
Mm.
a Black man.
Mm.
I
Mm.
appreciate that as my
Mm.
privilege. It's
Mm.
not something that I've created, it's not something that I've claimed, but it is a result of who I am and the fact
Yeah,
that I came out as a woman. And I
absolutely.
think it's really important that we accept that actually, we have different privileges, but when we're talking about race equity, it's
Mm.
appreciating that this is a privilege that you as a white person weren't born with. So
Mm.
how do you use that privilege and power effectively to
Mm.
drive equity for those who didn't have the luck of, and I don't say luck like, we don't want to be Black. I love being a Black woman, but
Mm.
being a Black woman doesn't give me certain privileges that it
Yes.
might do my white female friends.
Yeah.
So being really mindful of that.
That a privilege
Go for it.
aspect is that I think that when we use the language privilege, absolutely people say, well, I haven't had a privileged upbringing. I might have started off with a very humble background. I might have,
Yeah,
gone to the local comprehensive school. I might have grown up in a rough area. These terrible things might have happened in my life. No one's taking away from that. The privilege is
at all.
about whiteness, but it doesn't mean you haven't experienced a lack of privilege in lots of other areas. So
Mm,
when we're talking about race equity, we're talking about what whiteness gives you, but we're not ever saying you haven't experienced pain, you haven't experienced difficulty. And I think sometimes people jump to that place of, you have no idea my
yeah.
life that I've lived. It could have been really hard. It's just one thing that you haven't had is a discrimination because of the color of your skin.
Absolutely. I think the other thing that really stood out for me with something that you said was around we've never experienced equity, so people don't know what's on the other side of it. And
Mm,
I think that that is so powerful, is that fear really does drive our behavior.
really,
And I
yes.
think books like yours are so important because they are educating us as to what we mean by equity, and
Mm,
also hopefully giving leaders the tools to better explain that in their initiatives. So
mm,
this is what we're trying to achieve through
mm,
our equitable
mm,
initiatives and actions, and really
yes.
giving people visuals about what that looks like, so that that visual of the seesaw and, I'm suddenly down here and suddenly you're going to get some power because of
Mm,
equity initiatives and I'm going to be bumped off
mm,
is
mm,
completely not realistic. And I love that visual. Like,
mm,
I'm literally sitting here remembering being the lighter one on the seesaw and like being
mm,
bumped in the air and then
yes.
back on, and the pain and the
Yeah.
discomfort. Like, it's such a powerful visual. So I love that.
Mm,
Um,
thank you.
I think we know that as a society, as a species,
Mm,
we have achieved the things we've achieved because of change. We've
mm,
lent into, you know, getting on a plane and flying,
mm,
to the wheel being created and us driving. That we know that as a species we've evolved because we've leaned into change, but leaning into change and discomfort is what has helped us to progress as a society. And
mm,
you know this as much as I know this. In 50 years, the world isn't going to look the way the world looks. And it's
mm,
really important that we start to think about future generations and what they're coming into and how
mm,
we create that equity for them as well.
mm,
Where do you think, we spoke about this when we had our initial chat
mm,
before today, is where are we with equality and diversity in 2024?
mm,
Like, you've been in this space for a while, so you really have seen how things have transitioned.
mm.
From your perspective, where are we? How are we getting on?
I think we've made huge progress. I don't want to take away from that. It can feel like when you're working in this space, nothing's changing. You hear stories, you see things, and you think, oh, my goodness, I'm still in this space. And that
Yeah.
can be upsetting, but we have made huge strides. My grandmother came here from St. Lucia, and she would be amazed now. Sadly, she's passed away, but she would be so excited to know her own granddaughters, being awarded an OBE, that I'm able to, do the work I do, that we can talk about race and ethnicity in organizations we've got the language for it. We can talk about the challenges we experience and people will listen. And some people are great allies. We absolutely have made fantastic progress. The amount of conversations I've had in the last 5 years with people who are white, who are doing hard work on themselves to kind of rewire their brain and think about things differently. People who were told never mention race or ethnicity when they were growing up because that was rude, to now saying to someone, you've got a different lived experience to me. I'm interested. I want to know what I can do. I want to know what what I don't see. Ultimately, in lots of situations, we are our ancestors' wildest dreams right now. So I don't want to take away from that at all. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. But there are two things here. I think one is there's still a long way to go. Because if we look at the representation of diverse talent at senior levels in our organizations, it's low. If we think about just the UK, we're around between 13 to 19% of the population, people from the global majority. We're not, we're sort of 4.7% at senior levels. So we're still hitting a glass ceiling. We're progressing to a point and then it stops. The way that we are being measured and decisions are being made doesn't work for us. I'll give you a very quick example. Someone came to me and was looking for coaches from diverse backgrounds. I have a directory of coaches from diverse backgrounds. They said they must have had a CEO level in corporate organizations. I just had to bring the point. How many people from the global majority have had those roles in the UK? And then how many of them then have to have done that role, trained to be a coach, and then now be a credible coach out in the world? The percentage is so small because we're not looking at the whole population here of CEOs. We're looking at a minute population of the population, a minute amount. So this is the issue that you're going to judge someone on what they've done previously when there've been so many barriers to them doing that. Instead, you have to look at it differently. And so we need to be more creative in the way we look at things and actually just change our perspective. That's one thing. But the other thing is that we take our foot off the accelerator and we end up slipping backwards. We have been going uphill. That's what we've been doing, this uphill battle. We've been with our foot on the accelerator going up. But if you know that if you're going uphill and you take your foot off the accelerator, you just slide right back down. And that complacency, we've done race, tick. That's dangerous because we will go right back and have to start again. The investment in time, energy, resource that everyone's put into this, it would be a crime if we decided to take our foot off the accelerator now. So, I think that is dangerous. And when I did my research for the book, Derek Bell talked about racism as shape-shifting. He said that it is a constant shapeshifter and we have to be ever vigilant. So we know that racism doesn't look generally like people shouting at you in the street, abuse. It doesn't, that can happen. I'm not saying it never happens, but it's less likely to happen now in 2024. The racism is more bias, it's more microaggressions in the workplace. It's different. These little cuts that you get daily, saying little things to you that overall tell you do not belong. But no one's saying you don't belong, get out. And so racism has shape-shifted to something else, and we're educating ourselves about what that looks like. But it will shape-shift again. Once we've tackled microaggressions and we all get it, once we've really worked on our bias as much as we can, it will become something else. And so, we need to be ever vigilant about what this looks like, and because it will keep rearing its head. And I think that's really key. So a huge amount's been done, but there are many reasons why we still need to focus on this.
Definitely. I think that quote is so powerful. I've never heard it before, but it
Mm,
is, yeah, so
mm,
powerful.
mm.
So what would your call to action be for anyone that's wanting to develop their understanding of equity and drive that in their organizations?
Yeah. I think the first thing is you probably just need to do some work on yourself. I guess at one point in my life, I probably thought fairness looked like treating everyone the same, um, and
Mm,
and and it can be really difficult to think that fairness doesn't look like that. So I think there's some
yeah.
of your own work you need to do to understand that, to say, actually, if I give everyone the same and they're not starting from the same point, actually, the person who's doing well is going to do even better, and the person who was behind will still be behind. They'll do a bit better than they were, but they'll still be behind. What do I need to do
Mm,
to level things up? So I think there's a bit of work you need to do to really come to terms with this. And I've worked with managers who kind of say they do, and then they say, oh, but if I give them that, what am I giving to the other person? And it's like, no, that's not what
yeah.
equity is about. So do some work around that. The second thing I'd say is look out for inequity. Look out for the person who
Mm,
gets talked over in the meeting, who never gets that stretch opportunity. Never
mm,
gets the sponsor in the organisation. No one's volunteering to help them. Um, you know, Actually, I would say read the case study in my book and see how life can play out for some people quite differently, and start to consider what might be other people's experience. And the last tip, I mean, I could give a million tips to be honest, but I'll give a final tip, which is an exercise that I encourage people to do. Is called the Trusted 10 exercise. So what you do is you think about people in your life who you really trust, not your family, who
mm,
maybe you've been born into and you ultimately trust them, but others who are in your life, and note their names down and then map them out: religious belief, ethnicity, gender, country where they were born, etc., sexual orientation, it could be disability. Just map it all out and look at that picture. And what you might find is that you have a lot of quite similar people, in terms of those
mm,
characteristics.
mm.
And I think if you do find that, take a call to action from that, in that, who am I going to get to know better? Who am I going to bring
Yeah.
into my trusted 10? And and I just want to explain what I mean by trusted 10. So a friend of mine, she's a homeschooler and she's a Black woman, and she was joining homeschooling groups, and she often found that she was the only Black woman there. And she said everyone was lovely to her, but when it came to inviting people around for tea, she never got the invite. Yeah. So
Yeah.
being in the trusted 10 is not just about knowing people, because you can know a diverse group of people. It's bringing them into your
Mm,
trusted group. And I might not be inviting them to your
absolutely.
house. That might not be, that might be whatever. You might have your boundaries around around your home, but it's about how do you bring them in. And when you've brought someone from a different background in, that's when you really know that you're breaking through, all the racial barriers that exist. So, that's a good piece
Love
of
that.
work to do on yourself.
Definitely. I've taken that call to action personally. I'm going to do
Great,
that and see what
great.
my trusted 10 looks like. My call to action to anyone listening is, if you don't have the book,
Oh,
Equality versus Equity,
it's a
get
copy.
it. Trust me, there is something that every single one of us can take away from that book. And yeah, thank you so much, Jenny, for joining me. Today's conversation has been awesome. I think a really important one, and I think one that is definitely going to inspire a lot of people, but also have people just looking inward a little bit more and thinking about how they move forward, um, in their spaces or in their organizations. So thank you so much.
Thanks. It's a real pleasure. Really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.